Welcome, YouTube. Welcome to the Terrific 2 podcast with
Jamie Stark,
Brett Clausen,
and Preston Dorr.
Today we're going to talk about the college football playoff. Each of us are going to present a different point of view. I think all three of us have a little bit different perspective on this issue. We have a different opinion. So we're each going to take our own turn, present what we would like to see from the college football playoff, and then whoever makes the decision for the format of the playoff is going to immediately implement whatever the winner's strategy is.
Perfect.
So here we go. Brett wanted to go first.
All right, I do want to go first. All right, so my take on the college football playoff is there should never, ever, ever be more than 6 teams in the playoff in the history of the world, and I will give you my reasonings on that. I'm okay with 4 teams. I would be okay with it going to 6 teams, but no further. So what makes college football unique over every other sport in the history of modern American sports? I'll tell you, the sense of urgency. I love the sense of urgency in college football. You see, Nebraska, we even have an outside shot, maybe even this year, at making the playoff. And in week 2, if we lose to Colorado, guess what? We might be out of it. We got to win out if we were going to make the college football playoff. The sense of urgency. Right? I do not want it to be like the NBA where half the teams in the league make the playoff. I don't think that's any fun. It reduces the sense of urgency. Or even get worse, I guess, like the MLB. There's 162 games in the MLB or something like that? Who cares? Like, if it's, May 22nd and the Braves versus the Indians, like, who's watching that? That game really doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean? There's no sense of urgency. And even in the NFL, you think about it, teams can go on a 2 or 3 even game losing streak, like the Colts last year. They started out like 1-5 and they ended up making the playoffs. That's really cool. But again, those first games almost quote unquote didn't matter. There's just no sense of urgency. That's what I'm going back to every single time. Now let's look at some history. This is 2007 during the BCS era. What happened that year? LSU, a 2-loss team, ended up making the one-time playoff, the national championship game. They ended up winning the national championship with 2 losses. So within the next couple of years, leaving it the way it is with 4 teams, there's going to be a 2, potentially already even 3-loss champion the way it's currently set up, right? So if we were to expand upon that, I don't want to see a 4 or 5-loss champion. I think that devalues the regular season like crazy. Let's look back at 2012, Urban Meyer's first year, right? Mm-hmm. What happened that year? This is a little bit of a special circumstance, I understand, because they weren't actually qualified to go to a bowl game, but under Urban Meyer's first year in 2012, they went 12-0. Wisconsin that year, and because Urban Meyer's team, Ohio State, couldn't actually contend for the Big Ten championship, Wisconsin made it, and they were an 8-5 team. And I specifically remember this because us as the Huskers, we got kind of spanked by them, to be honest with you. But Wisconsin, they were an 8-5 team, and they ended up winning the conference championship, right? Mm-hmm. So under certain circumstances, with an 18 playoff, they might end up being in the playoff. I do not want to see an 8-5 team in the playoff at all. There are a lot of bigger issues, in my opinion, in college football, such as making sure that the conference scheduling is equally out fair between all the conferences, so they all have to play the same amount of out-of-conference games. I think that's a much bigger issue than expanding the playoff. So that's my opinion.
All right. Well stated.
I hear you there. See, I think it all goes back to why do we care about this at all? Why do we want 4, 6, 8, 16, 32? Like, why does any of that matter? We want games that matter all year long. Kind of like what you alluded to a little bit, that there's that sense of urgency. Right. But at the same time, if there are games how do I phrase this? We want games that are going to matter and be entertaining. I want something that's fun to watch. Are we cool with teams that are deserving? That's where it really comes down to. They're deserving, 8-5 Wisconsin, or are we looking for teams like these two are the best, and I want to see them play each other, and I want to see what happens. And I don't know the outcome before it happens. Those are the types of games I want to watch. So yeah, I looked a little bit at history, and I'm looking at 2015-16 Michigan State. Were they deserving? Yep. Won the conference title. Was that game fun to watch when they got blown out 38-0? Absolutely not.
Mhm.
That's a college football playoff. That is in this era. 16-17, Ohio State and Washington, both, again, deserve to win. Both deserve to go to the college football playoff. Both won their conference titles.
Mhm.
Fun to watch? Absolutely not. Got destroyed again. When there are clear differences between the best teams and everybody else, I don't want to see everybody else get destroyed. I want to see those other teams. I think what we have with the bowl series in college football, I think it's great. Because seeing the pros, like you were saying, half the teams get in there. But what's great about college football is you have all these cities, all these universities from all across America being represented. How do we get everyone to care? By getting them all involved. Half of them,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
In the NFL, it's a way smaller fan base,
Right.
or way smaller, like, in regionally. And so, yeah, they're able to get away with that. So, yeah, I think it all comes down to whether you think it's about who deserves to be in and watching actually the best 4 teams. And so we've already seen it with, look at Notre Dame last year.
Mm.
Again,
Yep.
were they deserving? Absolutely. Was it fun to watch when they got destroyed again? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then, counterpoint on that, look at Ohio State when they won it as a 4 seed, won the whole thing. Were they deserving? No. They didn't even get to the conference championship.
Mhm.
But were they the 4 best? Yes. So did they deserve to be in the college football playoff? In my opinion, yes. It's not about deserving, about winning your conference championship. It's about, I want to see the 4 best teams. What about Alabama when they won it as a 4 seed? Again, deserving? No. Didn't make it to the conference championship. Not deserving. Should have been Auburn, I guess, or was it Georgia? I don't even remember in that one. Should have been them. Technically, deserving? Yes. Were they the 4 best, though? Absolutely not. I want to see the 4 best teams go at it and then decide who is ultimately the best. So why 4, not 2? 2, we go back to things like 97 Michigan and Nebraska. Oh, we're both the best. Blah, blah. Well, imagine if those 4 teams had been in a playoff and then it's Michigan, Nebraska for a national championship.
Right.
Perfect 4-team playoff. I've never seen a scenario since we've been doing this where there are more than 4 teams that all can make an argument as the 4 best. Like
Right.
all 6 or 8 are arguably the best team in America. I've just never seen it. And so there's no reason to go outside of 4 because we want to keep every Saturday interesting. Why are we watching in September, October? Because those games matter.
Mhm.
And you don't see that in the NFL. You don't see that in any other D2 football, whatever.
Right.
So that would be my biggest reason.
All right.
Awesome.
A lot of good points. So, I'm going to represent the point of expanding it to 8 teams. To preface, I think 6 is perfect. I'm kind of with you on that, but I'm going to argue for 8 right now, and I'm going to make a very solid argument for that. And the entire reason of expanding to 8, or 6 for that matter, but I'm going to say 8, is to rid the selection process of subjectivity, and it's exactly what you said, is who's the best teams. Who's deciding that? People with heavy SEC biases right now, calling you out SEC. So, it is very, very heavily slanted SEC at the moment. So, if you're going to say that, okay, we're just going to go to 8 teams, and we're going to open it up to, the committee's going to select the 8 best teams. You know what's going to happen? 5 SEC teams. Screw that. All right, so here's an example of all the subjectivity that's happened in the playoff. Obviously, the BCS championship was also controversial. That's why they've gone to 4, because more teams deserve the chance to get in. And my main contention is, if you win a conference championship game, a Power 5 conference championship, you deserve to fight for a national title, regardless of record, and I'll get to that point in a second. So examples, 5 years into the playoffs, examples of how subjective and stupid the playoff selection has been so far. The most controversial year, possibly in my opinion, 2014. You stated it already. Ohio State lost to a 6-6 Virginia Tech team by 2 touchdowns. And you know who was left out? Baylor, Big 12 champion, and TCU, whose only loss of the entire season was to Baylor, who was a top 10 team, on a last-second field goal. Better resumes, should have been in. They deserved a chance. Both of them maybe deserved a chance for the title. Baylor for sure, because they won the championships. So, 2017, Alabama lost their last game of the regular season. Didn't even get into their conference championship game. Talk about SEC bias here. This is the core example. And you know who went out? Wisconsin ran the table in the regular season, 12-0, had one of the most dominant defenses we've seen in the last couple decades. And in their conference championship game, small point here, but they lost to a very good top 10 rated Ohio State team by 6. Okay, so basically what they did was they penalized a team that made their conference championship game and won their division in their conference, and they rewarded a team that didn't even make it to the conference championship game. In 2015, Michigan State got in, even though they lost to a terrible 5-7 Nebraska team.
Whoa.
And Pac-12
there,
champions Stanford did not make it in. I think they had 2 losses, but my point stands. 2016, Ohio State got in, did not play in the conference championship game again, and you know who didn't get in? Penn State, who won their conference and beat them in the regular season. 2018, I will contend, is the most clear cut of the 5 playoffs so far, although UCF did go undefeated for the second year in a row after beating Auburn, who beat Alabama, who got into the college football national championship or college football playoff last year. So now, am I saying that every single year, or even most of the years, that the 4 teams selected were wrong? Not necessarily. I would disagree with 3 of them, but isn't that the point? It's all subjective. It's who's making the decision and what criteria they're going to hold. As a coach or a player of one of these teams, I would not want to be in week 12 of the season, not with a 1-loss record, not knowing, even though I've done everything that I could, except for losing on 1 game, I know that's what you're going to say, but not knowing the actual criteria to get in. So here's my proposal. 18 playoff format. Here's who gets in. The 5 Power 5 conference champions. So that's 5 teams right there. Then Notre Dame, if they go undefeated, I would love to see them get into a conference, actually. That would make it much more fair, quote unquote, even though I hate that word. But as it stands, if Notre Dame's undefeated, they're in. And then who else gets in next would be the next precedence would go to a group of 5 conference champion who is undefeated. They get an automatic bid. And obviously there'd have to be tiebreakers if you end up with more teams than can fit in there, but the likelihood of that is not great. And then if there's any remaining spots left, that's where a little bit of subjectivity would work its way in. You could think of some different ways to go about that. Best records with strength of schedule as the tiebreaker would be my preference, but you could just say the highest rated non-conference championships or conference champions fill any remaining spots. And here's what I would also do. I think there's a huge mistake they made going to the 4-team playoff is the first round should be a home game for the higher seed. And that's what I would change about an 8-team playoff is the first and second round, the quarterfinal and semifinal, make them a home game for the higher rated seed. And what that does is it reinforces that the regular season matters. So if you talk about NFL, NBA, blah, 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 home court, home field matters. So that reinforces the regular season. And it would make higher attendance, higher revenue for the teams, the players, maybe potentially if we're talking about maybe pay for play at some point in the future for the conferences and for the NCAA. And I would say also it's very difficult for fans of teams to travel to multiple road games in a row. And finally, I'll conclude with this. We talk about relevance of the regular season. Under my format right here, Power 5 conference champions, undefeated Notre Dame, undefeated group of 5, and then any at-large bids after that. You know how many times in the last decade, 10 years of college football with this format, 80 teams would have gotten into this playoff. You know how many would have had more than 2 losses?
Don't know.
2. I'll take 2 out of 80. I conclude my case.
So, you said Alabama did not deserve to get in because they didn't win their conference
I
championship.
didn't necessarily say that. I'm just saying there were other people that probably deserved a
deserving
chance
more.
to fight for it. Mm-hmm.
Did they win that year? The whole thing?
Does it matter?
Yes.
You're using hindsight. I'm saying cut it off at the regular season or after the conference championship games. Who's got the resume? I don't care about the best team. I do, but the best team is decided by the resume.
So you would rather see an 8-5 Wisconsin get in and just get absolutely obliterated by, because they'd be probably the 8th seed, which is subjectivity,
Okay.
which you don't like, by the number 1 seed,
Mhm.
and you'd rather see that, and no one watches that game.
Then the current format, yes, I would. And
Why?
here's why. Number one, that year was a complete outlier.
Yes.
A team in their conference that would have won the conference, actually 2 teams in their own division were rated ahead of them and would have been in the conference championship game over them. It was Ohio State and Penn State. Both were suspended. Very unique circumstance.
Okay.
And to make another point, you talk about lopsided losses and how that's terrible to watch. That is the era of football that we're in. And thanks to Oregon, that's really, I mean, look at, you talk about 97. What happened in 98, it would be Orange Bowl. How many touchdowns did we beat Texas by? Nebraska, that is. How many touchdowns did we beat Tennessee by?
Right.
A lot.
Yeah.
But
Was
it
that
was the best
terrible to
2
watch?
teams.
Okay.
Right.
So it is what
Debatable.
it is. The best team
Did you-
was that much better.
Did you know that
than the other teams.
Michigan is also a shared national
Yeah.
title
And
for
in
that?
97. Yeah, I know.
Mhm.
Again.
Which is why they
what
went to the,
if?
So who
which
did
is
they
why they
actually
went to the
play?
BCS national championship and used the computer model, and so there were no shared titles anymore, and
Which
people
is a
hated
step
it.
forward.
So
It's
what
a
if they
step
had
forward,
4
though.
teams that year? Wouldn't that be awesome?
It would be better.
That would be perfect.
8 teams would be better.
Why?
There used to be 6 power conferences.
Yeah.
Don't you have some like bias towards the other conferences? Why only the Power 5? That's kind of subjective.
How's that subjective?
Why Power 5? Why not include the American Conference? Why not include the Midwest, or what is it, the whatever conference with Boise State and
I couldn't tell you exactly the historical relevance of that, but brass tacks is that the Power 5 conferences, which used to be 6, again,
Yeah.
are the major college football conferences.
based on?
I'm telling you in my model that we're putting in any group of 5 undefeated schools, which they should get a chance. I mean, look at the last 2 years UCF. Obviously, I have some bias there with little Scott Frost.
Exactly.
But if you look at them the year before, they beat Auburn, who beat Alabama. And then you look at this past year, Mackenzie Milton goes down. They've got a second string backup quarterback, and they still took LSU down to the wire. You're telling me that with a healthy Mackenzie Milton, that team can't win a national title? It's
I
garbage.
will say that it is slightly unfair because they don't have to go through the depth of the schedule that an LSU or an Auburn or
Which is why you don't give
Nebraska.
them an automatic bid.
Right.
It's
right.
only if they go undefeated.
I may
so
be
the
okay with
Boise
that.
States, the UCFs, what was it? Was it Western Michigan a couple years ago with the most overrated coach in the nation that now coaches at Minnesota?
Oh yeah, what's his face?
Yeah. So
Okay, I'm going to
Those
take you back
teams-
to a couple different issues though. So you said that we need direct guidelines for those that are going to qualify for the playoff in an 8-team bracket.
For only 5.
That will never, ever, ever happen. And you want to know why?
because people won't ask for it.
Because people want to have something to discuss about. If there are these qualifiers, it's okay, yep, it's already in. If you don't know for sure and people kind of have to take a guess at it, people like us or talk show hosts, Colin Coward, whoever, they're going to be talking about it way more. It's
Mhm.
something way more to talk about, to guess on it, than if there are direct guidelines.
Okay. So
Other thing-
there you miss it. Okay.
One thing, and then the home games for the playoff, that will never, ever, ever happen either. You know why? It's a revenue issue because those are actually bowl games like the Rose Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl. They will never take their revenue from those bowl games and just give it to the schools. They would just never,
Okay.
ever do that.
All right, I'll take both those points. So the first one, the reason that it probably won't ever happen with these direct criteria is it's just that if people don't ask for it forcefully enough, if you've got a majority or vast majority of the coaches, the commissioners of all these major conferences, they go to the NCAA and they say, this is what we want. We want the champions of our conferences in, and then 3 either at large or I would prefer the criteria that I laid out. Then you solve a lot of issues there. And if it's talked about by the people that are making the decisions, it could happen. So don't say it won't, because you're not going to screw a team that deserves a chance at a national title out of it just to make headlines. It's stupid.
Oh, I agree. I'm not saying
It's
it's
not
right.
fair.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm
It's
just
not
saying
fair.
that's the way it is.
All
It's
right.
more talkable.
So the second one, home games for the playoffs. You don't think that higher attendance would be more revenue?
For the NCAA.
Mm-hmm. For everybody.
So how would that work? So they would say, okay, we're just having the Fiesta Bowl at Georgia, at the Georgia Dome.
What I would do is separate the BCS bowls altogether. You just peel them back away. Maybe you pick one of those each year to have the national championship game on, but then you just peel those back away. So the Rose Bowl again would be whatever criteria they use to pick. So you just peel those back away from the college football playoff altogether. Maybe you have one every year that's the neutral site for the national championship game. But you're telling me that Jerry World, that's not even sold out, with like 50,000 people in attendance, would have more revenue when they've got to pay rent for that facility. I don't know how that all works, but they got to pay rent for that facility to be able to use it. They've got, all the other stuff that gets involved with it. You're telling me that would produce more revenue than 95,000 fans in Lincoln, Nebraska, or 110,000, however many
NCAA.
is in Michigan? Well, obviously you wouldn't just, the home person would not keep all of the revenue. It would be like an NFL playoff game. I don't know exactly the specifics of how that works, but there would be some revenue sharing between the schools, the NCAA, the conference, and all that.
Right. So one more question, I'll let you take over. So again, I'm just trying to figure this out. So like the Fiesta Bowl, obviously whatever organization that's putting on the Fiesta Bowl, I'm sure it's like an individual organization
Sure.
that's just hosting the Fiesta Bowl.
Mhm.
Okay. They're going to give up, because if they normally would be like a part of the college football playoff, they're going to be producing X amount of revenue.
Mhm.
So they're just going to give up like half of it, say, to like take a step back and just be like a sideline, not as big of a playoff game. You know what I mean? It's going to be like not even a very big game at all. And they're just going to give up half their revenue.
It'd be a small sacrifice. Sure.
I'm just saying that's a very big
I'm
issue.
not sure that they would give up half the revenue, because say hypothetically, Michigan this year, I think we both picked them to win the Big Ten, and say Washington wins the Pac-12, so they both get an automatic bid into the college football playoff. So if you go traditionally how the Rose Bowl has been picked, has been champions of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, so you'd have the runner-up. So say like Nebraska versus USC or Oregon or whoever. It'd still be a very high quality game. Obviously, the ones that would be pissed off would be those kind of mid-tier ones, maybe like the New Year's Six, the people right below that normally play on like December 28th and things like that. They're going to get downgraded a little bit in their bowl game, but I don't think it's going to be an issue at all as far as that's concerned, especially when they get a chance. I think it's 5 BCS bowls that's historically been it, and they're on a rotational basis. I think they would trade off, because not every single year do those ones even get to host the playoff games. So they'd be on a rotational basis. And if there needs to be some type of compromise where the semifinals and the finals are in those BCS bowls, whatever. If that's what it needs to make it happen, let's do it. But I just think it's going to be way more exciting for the fans, the players, the coaches, the conferences, everybody involved, if they're home games.
I can see you chomping at the bit, Preston. What do you got?
See, I'm not for changing tradition. I think that's what makes college football great the way it is.
What part of tradition?
Having like BCS, having bowl games, having like you're talking about, changing
What
up.
part of them?
What do you mean?
Like, we're not cutting out bowl games.
You're talking about like with the Rose Bowl. What are you doing with that?
Same they've always done.
It wouldn't be the Pac-12 and the Big Ten.
They can do what they want. It hasn't always every year been the Pac-12 and the Big Ten.
Wouldn't
There
Rose
are
Bowl be
rare
part of the
exceptions,
bigger
but-
playoff?
Say what?
Wouldn't the Rose Bowl be part of the bigger playoff, part of the 8-team playoff?
They'd be a rotational basis with the other BCSs for the championship in my model. Again, if I need to compromise to make it like the semifinals and the finals, but I just go back to, if I'm a fan of a team in the playoff, it's going to be awfully hard for me. I'm going to wait until that championship game to book my ticket, because I'm not traveling probably unless I'm more wealthy, I would say, or very well off. I'm not going to go to both of them. It's just not going to happen.
I'm still arguing for 4 just because, okay, say with your 8, those last 3 that get in, can some of them be for the same conference as part of the 5 that got in?
Yep. That's where your subjectivity comes in. So if you want your controversy, there it is. But I think the way that I lay it out is Notre Dame. So say, like last year, was Notre Dame undefeated? I don't remember. I feel like they were. So you'd have
They were.
Power
They
5
definitely
conference
were.
champions, Notre Dame, UCF, and you'd have one at large. Who would that have been? Maybe Georgia? So you'd have two
Georgia.
SEC teams. If you just say, hey, committee, choose 8, you're damn right, some years there'd be 4 or 5 SEC teams. That's how heavy the bias is.
Right.
So what makes that great, putting in those 8? Because you're going to have those matchups.
What do you mean, what makes it great?
Okay, so when you put in those 8 to potentially go in, is Notre Dame ever going to win the national championship in that?
How do you know?
Let's just throw all in 64 teams in.
No.
I mean, we never know.
You want the regular season to matter. Under this model, the regular season matters just as much.
Does
it
Auburn,
doesn't.
Alabama
It does.
at the end of the year matter? Does Auburn?
Yeah.
Alabama? No, it doesn't.
Except
They're both getting in.
it didn't-
in that model. What about Michigan, Ohio
No,
State?
they wouldn't.
They could both get in.
You think
model.
Auburn's going to be good enough?
What if they were?
But again,
What about?
the argument here would be that it's going to nullify the non-conference slate. And there might be something to that, but there's 2 points I would make here. One, teams aren't just going to slough off in the non-conference because if they want an at-large bid, they have to go undefeated in there if they're not going to win their
That's
conference.
actually a
The
very good
second
point.
thing with the non-conference is how many teams do you think could just put in their third string or second string, whatever, for the non-conference games because they don't matter, and they just take whatever results come, and then when conference play rolls around, they put in their starters, and they end up running the table. It's not going to happen.
Why did UCF not get in last year?
Strength of schedule.
What's going to encourage them to strengthen their schedule? Not letting them in.
They
Yeah,
play through
I
the
If
conference.
you
agree
don't,
with that.
if you don't,
I would
if
say
you
as
continue to, if you just let teams like that in,
I would
and
say-
strengthen their non-conference
Yeah.
schedule, then nothing in September matters.
I would argue that right now, today, the American Conference is better at football overall than the Pac-12.
I knew you were
I don't
going
know
to say
about
that.
that one.
No way.
I'm
Top
not
to
a fan
bottom,
of
there's
that's
no chance.
that's another
No chance.
YouTube
They
video.
have the
I
best
think.
team, and Memphis is a quality team. I couldn't name to you a ton of teams. In that
See, I'm
conference,
looking at the
but-
schedule this year. August, Auburn, Oregon. In August,
Uh-huh.
that game matters.
It's exciting. Yeah.
In 8 teams, they could lose that, and it wouldn't matter.
Mhm.
They could
also-
both easily get in.
In the
Yeah,
fourth
Houston,
team model,
Oklahoma.
they could do it.
Houston, Oklahoma. If
They
Houston runs the
could.
table and beats Oklahoma, and Oklahoma has a great season, Houston could get into a 4-team playoff.
How many undefeated teams have been in the playoffs so far for the 14 playoff?
Pretty sure it's just Alabama and Clemson. Like 3-4.
Alabama, I don't think has been undefeated at all. Clemson was undefeated last year. I believe Georgia was the year
I'm
before.
pretty sure they were the year that they lost to Ohio State.
Yeah,
They were the
Possibly.
1 seed and the 4
Yeah.
seed.
Possibly.
The first
possibly.
year.
But I'm saying, like, we're treating this as if, like, you have to win every game. What I'm saying is a vast majority of these teams in the playoffs lost a game. It's just the committee is valuing this loss over that loss, or these wins over these wins. When I'm saying, if you win a Power 5 football conference, you deserve to play for a national title.
I might lean more towards your argument if you put a stipulation on it.
I know what you're going to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can't
Less
have
than
more
2
than
losses.
2 losses as a conference champion.
Mhm.
I would maybe be okay with that because, again, I just made my entire argument why I want college football separate.
No more than 2.
2.
Well, I already said in the last 10 years, out of 80 teams that would have made this playoff, only 2. I mean, you're talking what? Less than 3% of the teams that get in would actually
Right.
have, and one of those was a very rare very rare situation. And the other one was actually Clemson in a year when they won the ACC when Virginia Tech only had 2 losses going into that conference championship game, and Clemson upset them, quote unquote, even though they beat them during the regular season as well. But those were the 2 instances. So very, very rarely is it ever going to happen. So I don't see the need for the stipulation.
See, this all goes back to still like, you're all about these teams deserve to be in. I just want to watch good football.
Mhm.
Like at the end of the day, why are we watching it anyway? Like, are you watching to see like, oh, like if you care about deserving, go watch D2. If you care about deserving, watch the NFL.
Well, I don't want to see 64 teams. I'll say that.
Right. Well, that's
I
the
don't
thing.
wanna
If
see
they
32.
can find a way to make money at it by expanding it, Why wouldn't they keep expanding?
Where the disagreement comes in is we all agree we love the regular season in college football. What I'm saying is this is the best model, and I think actually, to be fair, a six-team model would be the best in my opinion. But I probably have some issue with, there's two things that. One, I have an issue probably with the bye week for the 1 and 2 seeds there. And then the second issue I would have with it is, it's not necessarily my issue, but if the NCAA has the opportunity for 2 extra games of revenue, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
You know?
See, I think when you have 6, like I've never seen a situation where, again, I've seen 6 teams that all could say, hey, we're the best team in the nation. Obviously, everyone thinks that in their mind.
Mhm.
Good for them. That's what you need to think.
What about 2014?
14.
When they left TCU and Baylor out, who both probably, arguably, had better resumes than Ohio State.
They both had a loss.
So did Ohio State. To a 6-6 Virginia Tech team.
If they were undefeated, would they be in?
If Ohio State was undefeated, or they weren't. So
If TCU
I don't
and
get it.
Baylor were undefeated, would they be in?
Ohio State wasn't undefeated. They
If
lost to a
TCU
6-6 team.
And Baylor.
They lost to a
were-
6-6 team. A 6-6 team.
And Big 12
That's
was,
why the
was
beauty
on
of it is
down,
you got to win every game.
And
terrible.
the Big 12 was.
That's the beauty of it.
Alabama loses the last
Yeah.
game of the regular season. The last time viewers had an opportunity to see them 2 years ago, they
Right.
lost to Auburn and still got in. So why are we valuing these losses over these?
Well,
Auburns?
that's
I'll
where it
grant
goes
you that
into-
Auburn was a good team that year,
Right.
and it was quote unquote quality loss, but it was the last game of the regular season, and Alabama didn't even play for their conference title.
You were saying Wisconsin, when they ran the table,
It was an example.
they deserved to get in?
Yeah, it was an example. I didn't say that. I'm just saying it was an example
I'm just
of
saying.
the controversy of it.
Right.
I'd have to look again.
I think when you stop allowing teams to get in, especially with 8, even if you want to argue 6.
Mhm.
Again, UCF would have been in. Guess what UCF should be doing right now? Scheduling Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Florida
I
State,
agree.
maybe. Miami. They should be put in their schedule. Why aren't they? I have no idea. Guess why TCU went to the Big 12? Oh,
Yeah.
to actually be relevant in the Power 5
Yep.
conferences.
I agree.
That is forcing teams to do
Yep.
that. Otherwise, they would just stick around and wait for it to be an 8-team or a 16 playoff.
Sure.
And they
How
can
many-
run the table.
Here's another question for you. How many Group of 5 schools have gone undefeated in the last decade?
Probably again.
I don't know the
Alabama,
answer to this.
Clemson.
No, Group of 5.
What do you mean group of 5?
Group of 5, not the Power 5 conferences.
Mm.
Group of 5
Oh.
teams.
Oh, just a handful, I would assume. Probably.
There's literally only
Houston.
been 5-6 years maybe. There's UCF
Yeah.
the last 2 years.
Yeah.
There's Boise State obviously back in the late 2000s.
Mm-hmm. And Houston probably did it.
Houston, yeah, okay.
So
What?
I'm just saying it doesn't happen that often, and you're taking for granted how easy their schedule is. Again, I'm going to say,
They should be
the-
scheduling
the
other
American-
teams. That's why Houston has.
again, I'm going to
Oklahoma.
say the American is a tougher conference than people give credit for. Memphis is a high
They're
quality
gonna have
team.
to. They're gonna have to strengthen.
South Florida's
Again-
been a high quality
again,
team.
They're
I
all
think we
gonna have
said
to
that-
strengthen their non-conference schedule if they want to prove that to
Under the
anyone.
current model,
Again,
yeah.
That's why Houston's
Mhm.
playing
The
Oklahoma.
thing about those
That's why Florida's playing
smaller
Miami.
conferences, though, I mean, again, a lot of those teams are the top tier talent on their team, comparable to maybe even like a Nebraska, Wisconsin.
Mhm.
Probably.
Yep.
They're not going to have the depth at the defensive and
Who's to say?
offensive line.
You're saying UCF the last 2 years couldn't have competed for a national title with a healthy quarterback?
Yeah, but I'm just saying it's not really fair when they're having to go through a schedule that's a lot easier.
What's Alabama's margin of victory last year?
I have no idea.
I grant that they were a very good team and finally got a quarterback that was worth something, which has always been their struggle. But SEC's conference is overrated. The Big Ten last year
Definitely
wasn't
is.
like crazy,
It wasn't crazy.
in my opinion. You know, the Pac-12 obviously was pretty weak. You know, you're talking about like two different things, like two sets of standards. So, you know, and let's go back to this one. Say hypothetically, UCF went undefeated the last 2 years and they had Florida in their non-conference schedule. Do they
They're
get
in.
Do they get into the 14
Yes.
playoff?
They do.
I would contend with you
If
on
Florida
that.
was any good,
I would,
if Florida had
I
a
would
good
contend
season,
with you on that.
I think they definitely would be. That's the biggest reason why they didn't get in, and that's why it's encouraging. What if they put 2, Power 5 schools in their non-conference schedule, and let's say they put game one of the season, and they move their schedule up, kind of like the SEC does. They move up their schedule. They're playing in conference by week 3 already, and then instead of just playing out conference the whole time, they have 1 week,
Mhm.
like week 11 or whatever
Yep.
it is, where they normally would play, like an SEC school would play like no name state. What if they scheduled somebody really good then?
Right.
Again, it's two sets of standards.
What do you mean?
It's saying like, hey, group of 5 schools, you have to schedule really tough non-conference games. And you know what, Alabama, just play Murray State. No worries.
See,
It's
this
a Power 5 school,
Mhm.
which you argued is.
Yeah,
Maybe
they
that's
take
it.
precedence over the group of 5. But I'm saying
Then why do they need
that an
to?
undefeated group of 5 school should be in. So we're missing the point.
What I love is that this, by having only 4 teams, it forces teams to schedule good non-conference
Right.
games so that September matters.
So that
What
if
do I
they-
want?
so
I
that
want.
if
I
they
don't want
lose
the
them-
playoffs just in January.
But it
I
doesn't
want playoffs all
incentivize that.
season long.
It
Yes,
doesn't
does.
incentivize
Does
that.
it?
I agree.
It actually
Yeah.
incentivizes these schools to schedule patty cakes in their first 4 games, so that way they can practice for the regular seat for the conference slate. Because if you schedule, say hypothetically, as an example, Wisconsin versus LSU here a couple years ago, neither team would choose to play that in the
I
non-conference.
think you're more arguing like a smaller school scheduling a couple like
I'm saying all
hard
of them.
schools.
All of them.
See, I can see from
The
your point of
incentive's
view.
not
If
there
Pac-
right now.
okay, look at Washington. They have 1 loss on the season. They run. Then otherwise, they have a good season, and they schedule nobody in their non-conference. Guess what? They don't get in,
Mhm.
even if they win their conference.
Well-
Should have scheduled someone really good, and then you could be
It's
losing.
debatable.
Then you could be Ohio State and lose to a 6
Again,
and 16
it's
and
a
still
good
get in.
it's a good point, but I'll say it's debatable. Alabama
Schedule good
again,
games.
what-
I want to see good games in
Yeah.
September.
Okay, I'm with you, man. So that's why you go to the 18 playoff, and that's why this is why. Because if you win your conference, you're in. Period.
Yeah, so play
what,
nobody.
So what? No. What would happen if we said if you win your conference, you're in?
Yeah.
Do you think that non-conference games would get more competitive or less competitive?
Oh, so they're not trying to win their
They would
conference
probably
games.
be more competitive,
Non-conference.
No, they'd be less competitive.
You think
They're
that they
a
would just?
prep
You think
for
they
the
would just
actual season.
schedule?
That matters.
You think they would
So
just
those
schedule
first 3
patty
games-
cakes?
Those 3 games wouldn't matter.
You think they would just schedule
If
all
you're
patty
lying,
cakes?
those
Yeah,
three
They would
games
I
schedule
agree
3
with
patty
that,
cakes?
Yes, why would they not?
They wouldn't matter.
No.
Those 3 games don't matter because it all matters about the conference.
You would want a good opponent so you could measure how
How would
good
you
you're going to
possibly
be
do
that
that?
year.
Nobody would think like that.
Yes,
everybody
zero.
knows would think like
No.
that.
You bet. Good
Why?
coaches.
Nick
If you
Saban,
good
only-
coaches
really
would.
good.
No,
Yeah.
no team would ever think
That's
like
The
that.
incentive right now is for Alabama to schedule Murray State, Jacksonville State, who almost beat LSU a couple years ago, by the way,
If
and all these patty cakes
If
in their
you could
non-conference
be-
slate. And then, to take it, your point apart farther, in week 11 of their season, they play these patty cakes and
Yes.
beat them by 75 points.
Yes.
Okay.
How is that fun? There's an incentive
one's
right
watching.
now for them because if they lose an out-of-conference game, then they're very likely out.
Yeah.
So why would they schedule a
tough
good
ones?
opponent
Yes.
in this model right now?
In the model right now,
In this model right now, because if they lose it, they're done.
you're telling me that if Oregon beats Auburn,
Auburn
and then
is very
even has
likely
a
out.
really close loss in the Pac-12,
I mean, Auburn would have to
runs
run the table.
and everyone else has
Right.
a 1 loss, they're not in. Of course they're in.
Who? Which one?
Because they
Auburn?
beat a really good quality, and Auburn has
It depends what everybody else is going to do.
Auburn would have, obviously, but Auburn would have to have a good season.
Yeah.
If Oregon plays no-name state, has 1 loss, they're not in. There's just no chance
I think
unless
people
the rest
look
of
at the quality of wins,
yes,
not
and
specifically at the non-conference.
and they look at how bad the losses are to who,
Mhm.
aka
Yep.
well,
That's why Ohio State didn't get in
Ohio
last
State
year.
did
You
not.
bet. You bet.
So that's
Yeah.
why games in September, like
Mhm.
Notre Dame and Georgia, that game matters.
Mhm.
Ohio State, Nebraska, that
Yeah.
game matters.
It
If-
matters.
to both teams. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
So-
those games are irrelevant
I'll say
in
this.
an 18 playoff.
You know how I feel about
Or 6.
regulations, right? I don't like them.
Mhm.
If we're going to expand this playoff, you're going to have a ton more regulations. Like, as of right now, I don't know what the exact number is, but I know the SEC can schedule 1 more out-of-conference game
Yep.
than a lot of other conferences.
Yep.
That is absolutely...
Yep.
And again, like you said, I don't like the word fair,
I'm with you.
but that's not necessarily fair. And how
Yeah.
the SEC also does it, they also, like you said, it's like week 7, 8, and all of a sudden they have Panera Bread State
Yeah.
as
It's a
my
warm-up
favorite
game
talk
for
show
the
host
rivalry.
says.
Yeah.
But yeah, they have Panera Bread come in and they beat them 75 to nothing.
Yeah.
And nobody
Yeah.
else is doing that. So again, if we're going to expand it, we're going to have all these extra regulations where they have to play the exact same out-of-conference games. They have to
I'd be in
play.
favor of that.
They can't play the out-of-conference games during the season anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
I'm in.
I don't want necessarily all those regulations. I want schools. to be
You'd
able to
rather
do-
have teams that probably should get in that don't, like Baylor and TCU in 2014, or
Win all your games.
undefeated UCF.
Have a tougher non-conference schedule.
Oh,
Mhm.
so the poll changes for every team.
What do you mean? Do you know what Baylor or TCU's non-conference schedule was that year? Do you have any idea?
I did not look that up. No.
I bet it was garbage. Because if they had
Who knows?
one loss
You know what the
and they
controversy
had a really
was
good
that
win
year?
against
Actually,
a good SEC because they had the bias,
I
cool. Everyone should
actually-
be scheduling Alabama,
yeah,
Auburn, LSU, A&M,
Yeah.
Vanderbilt.
yeah.
A&M. That'd be
They
an
should,
automatic
they should
win.
be just scheduling all those teams in if it's like an SEC bias.
You know what
and
was
then beat them,
actually the
and then they're
controversy
good.
that year, though? The actual controversy that year was not that they thought that Ohio State's resume was better because they were going on to their third string quarterback.
Mm.
What the controversy was is that Baylor and TCU were in the same conference, and Baylor won the conference because they beat TCU by a last-second field goal, but TCU
They didn't even have a
the
conference
better.
championship at the
They
time,
had
right?
the better resume in that Baylor's one loss was to a 6-6 West Virginia team.
Guess
I
what that
remember.
forced the Big 12 to do? Have a conference championship game.
Yep.
Fair
and
enough.
then they would have been in.
Yeah.
It forces
They wouldn't have, though. You
good
don't know that.
Games.
You don't
It
know
forces
that.
good games.
And
You have
that's
So,
less
so
people.
Baylor and TCU play again in the conference championship game that year, and whichever one wins, who gets in over Ohio State that year?
Say it again.
Baylor and TCU would have rematched in the Big 12 title game.
The winner. The winner
The
goes.
winner
in.
of that would have been in over Ohio
Yes,
State
the
as their
winner.
contention.
Yes, they would have.
That probably is true. And that's the other thing. So
let's say you're running a company and only the top 4 people get bonuses.
That would suck. It should be 8.
Do you think do you think that those people work a little harder to get that than if there were 8? Do they work any harder?
Are you
If
gonna
eight people-
tier?
eight
are
people
they,
get it,
yeah, are they
or
splitting the
4?
bonuses, or are
Are
they
you gonna
No,
tier
no,
the
no.
bonus
It's
so
just
that
like
the top
it's
4
you
people
get-
get better
you get
bonuses?
whatever you
$5,000
whatever you
Christmas
provide
bonus.
for value?
Top 4 get it. Do you work harder if there's 8 people that get it or 4? Who works harder?
There's not enough information to answer the question.
What do
So,
you mean? Do you work harder?
The question would be, if 8 people got it, would the top 4 people get more bonus
Nope.
than the bottom 4?
No, you just get the exact
But
same.
that's not what I'm saying then, so it's irrelevant. What I'm saying
Get a
is that
chance.
the top 4 get home field advantage.
So you just get a little bit more.
That's a big advantage. You go at the end of December or the
You
beginning
think-
of January and play in Ann Arbor, Michigan, if you're Alabama, because Michigan got the 1 seed and Alabama got the 8 seed, or like that would ever happen, but say hypothetically that happened, it's a huge advantage for Michigan.
Okay, we can play.
Giant.
Okay, we can play it your way then. The top 4 get more of a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Do you work harder or less? Do you work more hard or less hard to get there? If there's only 4
Equal.
that get the best bonus.
Equal.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
No.
Of course you work harder. If
It depends
You're
on what
running
other
a race,
structures are set in
and
place.
the top 4 get prize
It
money,
depends on the
and the rest
criteria.
don't.
It depends
And
on
you
a lot of
see
other
5,
factors.
and you see 5. Do you run a little faster to beat 5? Or to beat the 4th person? Do you run a little faster, or do you just go, I'm here.
Say
I'm already in
again.
the top 8.
Oh,
I could
I would
break it down.
definitely, dude.
I could run
It
the-
depends
I
on
think
the
it's really
person,
easy.
obviously, but if you're competitive, which the
I hope you are in college football.
yeah, if you're competitive, you're gonna want to be number 1, no matter what.
Exactly.
Oh,
Number 1. But if only 4 get a chance to be in there instead of 8, guess who's running faster? If you're already 6, you're like, I'm good. If I need to, but I need to work harder to get to the 4th spot, you're going to work harder, aren't you? If you're competitive, yes or no?
I'm always gonna work harder, no matter what. Especially if there's more incentive. to
You're
get
just being ridiculous.
Here's the other question for you. So
You work harder.
so
That
you're-
is the argument, and therefore
So
that's what
you-
these teams are doing. They're scheduling harder to get because it's way more difficult to get in the top 4 than it is to get in the top 8. Is it more difficult to get in the top 4 or
It
top
depends.
8? Slightly.
It would
It's a
just
lot
be
more
about
difficult.
criteria.
It's a
to
lot
get
more
in.
difficult. You just
The-
mentioned how
the
many teams
entire-
that deserve to be in and didn't because
And again,
it's
this
that hard.
this is why I say that 6 is probably perfect as far as the selection process of the playoff, but I don't see 6 happening because of the 2 factors that I mentioned. Now, the other question I'd like to turn on you is, so you're in favor of 4 teams?
Yes.
So if expanding the playoff inherently means regular season getting worse, then why not go back to 2?
Because of exactly what I mentioned before with 97. I know there's a lot of cases for this, but I'm not a college football historian. Like 97, when you have Michigan and Nebraska, and it's like, oh, who should have been there?
Yep.
And I know there's other cases where
USC split one.
there are, I believe there are cases where there are 3 or 4 teams that
Here's-
all could argue
yeah.
we are the best in the entire nation.
Here's the rebuttal for you on that.
I don't see
Is
5, 6.
97 Nebraska, Michigan. The reason they split the title is because it was pre-BCS.
Yes.
As soon as they went to the BCS title,
Yes.
it was quote unquote the 2 best teams. And somehow one year we ended up with Alabama LSU rematch in the
Right.
title, which was
Yeah.
the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yep, it
That's
was
the
like 96.
problem with the subjectivity of the playoff selection
Who was
process.
better than them that year?
I would have to look, but I'm saying
I don't think anyone was. I think they were all.
that
like,
game was
this is stupid,
already
it's
played
SEC.
once that year.
Oh, so do you care about the entertainment value, or do you care about who's most deserving?
Most deserving. They already played.
They were deserving.
They already
They
played.
were really good.
LSU beat Alabama that
Yes.
year already. Why
So
play the game again?
So it was done. They should have just declared LSU the champion.
The regular
Yep.
season matters.
Done.
So
So
one
if
other
Alabama
thing.
gets beat by LSU, why should they get into a 2-team national championship
So-
game?
I would have to look at the records, but
Me
I
too.
guarantee everybody had at least one loss, if not probably
Probably.
2.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone probably had 2 losses.
That doesn't mean Alabama should get a rematch. That's unfair to LSU, who did the work in the regular season. Because you all know that rematches are way harder to win after you've won
Yes.
the first time.
Probably.
Always.
Hence the reason why our
Terrible.
18 team in high school managed to beat Randolph the 3rd time around
There you
in the
go.
playoffs.
Yeah.
So
You had to be there.
throwing this out there real fast. It almost is if we actually already expanded the playoff, to be honest with you. Think about it. Think about it. We already have conference championships. When does that take place?
First week of December.
First week of December. I'm just saying, typically what happens if you have the record set in place and you win your conference championship, that projects you into the college football playoff. Yes or
It
no?
doesn't, though. No,
if you're
it
the
does
Pac-
not.
Not if you're the Pac-12 and stuff.
Yeah, not if you're backed
Well,
up. That's
the Big
thing.
Ten's been left out at least
You already
twice.
have a playoff game at the end of your conference, though. That's what
It's
I'm
not.
saying.
It's not, though.
It's
Not
a-
in the current model.
Because there's room for subjectivity, is what he's going to say. It's not objective.
Well, if you win the conference championship, you're not automatically in.
of course not.
No, of course not. There
So
has
how's
to
it a
be-
playoff? You don't advance to the next round.
No, but it's an elimination game sometimes. So what is that? That's a playoff.
No.
Yeah,
It's an
absolutely.
elimination game.
No, it is though. It's like
What was it for Wisconsin in, what was it, 2017? Wisconsin was undefeated. Yeah, it was an elimination game. It wasn't
Yeah.
a playoff.
They lost.
that is
They
a
lost.
playoff.
They were out.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That was their only opportunity to get in.
Alabama
because
lost, but they got
didn't-
in, so
they didn't
what's the
have,
difference?
Yeah, they didn't have the eye test.
They were really
so
good.
Jiminy Christmas.
They were really good.
Alabama was
I'd
really
like to see
good.
the 4 best teams play.
The eye test is
Four
the
best
stupidest thing
team.
I've ever seen.
Well, it
You
is.
gotta
And
throw a
agree.
resume.
I think there should be a criteria, but again, it just goes back to I don't think there ever will be.
Yeah, there needs to be.
I think there should be.
The,
Playoff committee, you're never going to hear the end of it.
the year we have 4 undefeated teams, 5 undefeated teams that are all like really good schedules and they have a good non-conference game,
Probably.
then we can have an argument. for
Very
1-4.
unlikely.
Exactly my point.
But we have a lot
Win
of
all your games, have a good non-conference schedule, you're in. There's your criteria.
Okay.
Yep,
Objectivity.
I agree.
So
Those
you're
are the things.
talking 5 undefeated teams. What about 1 undefeated team and 5 or 6 one-loss teams?
Well, 1 is in, and then depends on the strength of the schedule.
Well, what's the difference? You're saying undefeated, so you're saying strength of
I'm saying,
schedule is
If you have
the
an undefeated,
tiebreaker.
if you have an undefeated season and you have a good non-conference game, you are in. That's
Well, that was
the
a whole
criteria.
debate like last year.
What other-
Otherwise, you are
well,
leaving it up
That
to
was the
somebody else to
whole
determine.
debate even last year. What seed was Notre Dame in the playoff last year?
3, I believe.
3 seed, right?
Yeah.
And why weren't they a number 1 seed? They were undefeated.
Weird.
Strength of schedule.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if they're
You really want to see
trying
number
to
one
prove my
Notre
point?
Dame play who is 4?
Oklahoma.
yeah, it'd have been Oklahoma versus Bama, right? And then
And it would have been Clemson, Alabama for an elimination game.
Sure.
That would be terrible.
Why?
Because it was obvious.
Oklahoma.
Is there anybody here who thinks that Alabama and Clemson were not the best 2 teams last year, or even?
Well, if they get seeded that way, I mean, if
Every
they get
time.
seeded as the 1 and the 4,
That's what everyone
or
wants to see
the
play.
2 and the 3, they're going to play that way. So, hypothetically speaking, Notre Dame, as the only undefeated team, probably should have been the 1 seed. Or
I don't
arguably,
agree.
I don't agree, but I'm saying you could argue that they should be the 1 seed because they were the undefeated team. So, if you had Notre Dame versus 4 seed Oklahoma, who do we think would win that game, though?
probably Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. You don't think Oklahoma was a championship caliber team?
Nebraska should just go independent.
Yeah,
Play nobody.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is
And
true.
then they get into the
That's
18,
true.
Even though they didn't
16
play nobody.
college.
They played
football.
They played a handful of good teams. They played
Stanford.
Michigan. They played Michigan
That's what
State,
that would
right?
Michigan
encourage.
State.
That's what that
And
would
then
encourage.
USC's always
If you
got a lot
had
of talent.
6 or 8,
Yeah.
it would encourage cupcakes. And they would get destroyed in the
agree.
playoffs.
Wouldn't
They wouldn't win
encourage cupcakes.
championships. They wouldn't win
I-
championships,
You wouldn't
but they would
encourage
get to the
cupcakes?
playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't happen.
Hey everybody, be sure to like.
Subscribe.
And comment below. Let us know your thoughts.